Thank you, Marcus, and thank you all for coming. Thank you all for the invite. I got to tell you, I am pleasantly surprised about Minnesota Normal. I think you all are probably the most diverse, normal organization in the country. And that's shocking, because if you all know anything about me, about a year ago, just under a year ago, I wrote a piece in The Nation in which I kind of criticized Normal and Marijuana Policy Project and another number of marijuana sort of organizations for not having race on their radar. And so I am delighted and pleasantly surprised. So thank you all for the invite. So let's get into it before time runs out. As Marcus pointed out, I wrote this book, High Price. It came out about a year ago, just over a year ago. And having written this book has taken me all over the globe, and I've been learning a lot about drug policy in various countries, including various states in the United States. But the thing that I'm learning most, that one of the things that's been surprising me most, is how ignorant the world is about drugs, including drug users, especially drug users. So my remarks today, I want to make sure that it's clear. I'm going to talk about marijuana today, in which I don't usually talk about marijuana. I certainly didn't talk much about marijuana in High Price, in part because I thought that marijuana had enough advocates for it, whereas cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin has far fewer advocates. But marijuana, of course, needs more advocates, or it needs also to have advocates, as I'm learning, because I thought the battle was actually over with marijuana. But that's not true, as you all know. And so that's part of my education. But as I was saying, what I say about marijuana today, it will be specific to marijuana. I'll talk about marijuana specifically, but all the things that I'm saying about marijuana could be applied to heroin, could be applied to cocaine, could be applied to methamphetamine. So please keep that in your mind as we talk. And what I would like to talk about today is some of the sort of misapprehensions that people have about marijuana. I use the term misapprehensions instead of the term myths, because misapprehensions is that myths is kind of like a story, kind of almost like a deliberate effort. Misapprehensions in some cases can be deliberate, but sometimes the people just have these incorrect interpretations and misunderstanding. So I'm going to talk about the misapprehensions. I'm going to talk about some of the special interest groups who are who it is in their best interest to keep marijuana's legal status where it is now. And then I'm going to talk about racial discrimination as it relates to marijuana arrests. And then I'm going to talk about what we can do as a group. But I think this is it's a very interesting time. It's 40 years ago, almost to the day, that Peter Bourne, some of you all might know Peter Bourne, he was the former drug czar under Carter, and in 1974, 40 years ago, he said that cocaine should be legal. It's about as safe as marijuana, and he was making this argument, and the country was kind of listening. And so we were at a place in the country at that time where we were open to some of these ideas. And so I find it interesting that I'm here before Normal, where some in Normal may have played a role for Peter Bourne losing his job as a drug czar. So it's a strange world. But we'll move on and talk about some of marijuana's misapprehensions. When we think about marijuana's misapprehensions, there are so many. I'm going to try and cover the big ones. And a major one of the major ones is that THC concentration in marijuana has increased to unseen levels, right? These levels we have never seen before. And by extension, that means that the current marijuana that we have is too dangerous for use. This is one of the sort of arguments that we hear talked about in the country. as we think about it, THC concentration in the average THC concentration in marijuana cigarettes has definitely increased. But the question becomes, what does that mean? I mean, we talk about the average THC concentration increasing. The thing that we have to understand is that every year, the DEA, law enforcement, they confiscate marijuana from the street, and they do the analysis. And then you can see the THC concentration slowly going up over time. Now, the thing is, that's true, but it's not new. This is not new. People have talked about it like these are THC concentrations that we've never seen before. It's just simply not true. People have always known how to breed high THC containing cigarettes. That's always been the case throughout our history. So that's just simply not true. Not only is it not true, it's probably desired that you have a higher THC concentrated cigarette, because that means that the stronger the cigarette, the fewer the hits that you have to take off of the cigarette. So that would be actually desired. So the way people talk about it, as if this is some new animal that we've never seen before, and this new animal will make us crazy, it's just simply not true. Now, I want to say there are some caveats that we should be aware of when we think about a stronger THC concentrated cigarette. You all know this. I mean, I'm just trying to help give you guys some arguments, but you all know that as we think about the caveats, sure, if someone who is a novice smokes a very high THC containing cigarette and they never smoked marijuana before, they can get in trouble. So it's important that you all help people to understand. This provides like an educational opportunity moment for all of us, and we all have to participate in this education. One of the most important things when we think of any drug is dose. We want to make sure that we all understand that as we increase the dose, you increase the likelihood of toxicity. We know that. You want people to start off slow before smoking like a champion. They have to start off slow, right? You want people to start off slow. Crawl before you walk. You also want people to attend to the fact whether or not they are tolerant to the effects. As I pointed out, if they're not tolerant to the effects, you can run the risk of getting in trouble. What we know from this type of research that I've been doing for the past 25 years or so is that when you allow the animal, whether that's a rat or whether that's a human, when you allow the animal to become tolerant to drug effect, it becomes protective. So if we take a drug that is neurotoxic and give an animal who doesn't have any experience with that drug a whopping dose, yeah, you can see some neurotoxicity. But if you slowly escalate the amount of drug over several days and then give that whopping dose, you don't see any neurotoxicity. In fact, it's protected. That's the same with tolerance. So we want to make sure we encourage people to build tolerance before they start smoking large amounts. And you also want to make sure, it's part of our educational efforts, we want to help people to understand the setting under which drug use occurs. We want to make sure that novices are not smoking alone. Smoke with people or use with people who have some experience, because they can walk you down, talk you down. If you have some problem, you get anxious or what have you, an experienced person can say the effects will wear off, just chill out, it'll be fine. That is so important, but we haven't emphasized this enough in our education. And so this is what we have to do. And finally, we have to emphasize the importance of route of administration. When you smoke a drug, the effects are felt more immediately, almost instantaneously, compared to when you eat a drug via like edibles. The peak effects can take as long as 60 minutes or 90 minutes, the peak effects. It takes longer. So that means that if you don't feel the effects at the 15 minutes, don't put more in the system if you're a novice. But that's what people do. But we can provide this sort of education to help people keep people safe. But we've known these lessons in pharmacology for hundreds of years, but we just haven't shared it with the public. And so that's part of our job here to help people, keep people safe. Now, as we think about us being remiss as a public, me as a scientist, and other scientists being remiss, there are every day so many opportunities that we miss. Here's just one sort of example of an opportunity that we miss that combines all of the elements that I just talked about: dose, tolerance, the setting, the route of administration. Here's an opportunity that we missed, but we as a nation, we kind of laughed at this opportunity, or we laughed at the sort of state of the person.
A councilman from Dearborn, Michigan is outraged over a 911 call. He wants to know why no charges have been filed against a police officer who admits to confiscating marijuana from suspects and then baking it in brownies. And once he and his wife were full and high, they thought they'd overdosed and called 911.
I think I'm having an overdose of the still as my wife.
Overdose of what?
Marijuana. I don't know if it had something in it. Can you please send rescue?
Do you guys have fever or anything?
No, I think we're dying.
Okay, how much did you guys have?
I don't know. We made brownies, and I think we're dead. Time is going by really, 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 really slow.
Well, instead of being charged, Prilla. Sorry. Instead of being charged, the police department let the officer resign. His wife was not charged either. So far, police officials have not commented on the case.
Now, how do you follow a story?
So we all laughed. We all laughed. This happened in April 2006. We all laughed at this sort of thing because it's funny. I mean, you all know, anybody who has any experience with marijuana, you know, or edibles, you know not to keep putting it in your system if you are an amateur, right? You know that. So, and you also know that the person was not going to die. The person was going to be fine. You know that. And we all laugh. But when Maureen Dowd wrote her piece in the New York Times, people didn't laugh. She did exactly the same thing as the cop in Dearborn, Michigan, but it was taken seriously. She said she nibbled off the end of this sort of chocolate bar, and then when nothing happened, she nibbled some more. She's a novice. She went out to Colorado to report on marijuana legalization, and she thought she'd understand something about it. And so she ate a candy bar, and she had no history of THC use. Equally stupid as the cop and his wife. But we took this seriously. This got so much attention. But the thing that should have been said, or should be said of these kinds of things, it's like, it would be like me, I don't drink alcohol, it would be like me taking a fifth of vodka and drinking it all, and then reporting to you that, hey, alcohol can be dangerous. That's what happens. But we have an opportunity to provide some public education. These drug effects are predictable. And when people write things that are less than smart about them, we should beat them up. This is inappropriate. This is inappropriate because it clouds the issue and it doesn't help to keep people safe. And that's the real concern here. So it is true. It is absolutely true that THC concentrations have increased over the past several decades. But what people say about this increase is oftentimes just misinterpreted and misunderstood. So other sort of misconceptions or misapprehensions about marijuana is this issue about the cognitive and brain effects of the drug. Now, when I'm saying cognitive and brain effects, that's not what people say in the scientific literature. What they say in the scientific literature is abnormality, alterations, deficits, impairments. It's always in these pathological terms. And we will see why that's inappropriate. But before I can show you why this is inappropriate, I have to just give you just quick background when we think about studies, the scientific studies of marijuana. Just quick background. When anytime somebody is testing cognitive effects of a drug or cognitive performance or cognitive impairment, whenever a study is comparing, looking at cognitive performance, they must compare the cognitive performance of the targeted group, marijuana users, for example, have to compare their scores with normative scores from a normative database, taking into account the people or the person's age and education. And so we have a normative database for cognitive performance for all of us. So if we take an exam, I'm a 48-year-old man, or I'll be 48 at the end of this month, with a PhD, and my cognitive performance will be compared to other folks who are of the same age and the same sort of educational background, not against 16-year-old high school dropouts. My performance won't be compared with them because it wouldn't make any sense. So we have to understand that when we compare cognitive performance or brains or what have you, it has to be compared to like groups, right? And there's a normative database that we have. Now, as we think about now marijuana's effects on cognition, this is a paper I published almost 15 years ago. And this was a paper looking at marijuana users do complex cognitive tasks. And what we've reported was even when marijuana users who are tolerant to many of marijuana's effects, these are people who smoked on a regular basis, we gave them complex cognitive tests. What we found was that their performance slowed a bit on some tasks, but accuracy remained the same. So you had some slowing of performance, but accuracy remained the same. I published this nearly 15 years ago. Several people have replicated it. We have replicated it in different sort of forms. Well known. Marijuana's effects on cognition, well known. What you will hear is that we need more research. We don't know. We need more research in this area. We need more research here. What that means is that we need research that will say what I need it to say. That's what it means. There has been no psychoactive drug studied more than marijuana and alcohol. We have tons of data on the effects of marijuana, and you, the taxpayers, have paid for it. And so that's an important sort of point for you all to know, particularly as we think about recent studies that have come out. There was a recent study, a New Zealand study, that showed or claimed to show that young people who started smoking marijuana before the age of 18, who started smoking on a weekly basis, before the age of 18, they lost IQ points. And this was I hope you all have heard of this study because many people talk about this study. It's important to know that we're talking mainly about the area that has the red circle. It's important to know that these are the folks when they were children, their IQ was at this level. Now, when they're adults, their IQ is at this level. It's important for you all to know that this is a statistically significant difference. That's important to know. But what is also important, and probably most important to know, is that their IQ still remained within the normal range of cognitive functioning. Now, what that means is that if we test people on this side of the room's cognitive performance and compare it with the people over on this side of the room, we might see a statistically significant difference. But both groups will remain in the normal range. We have this wide range of human variability in terms of cognitive functioning, in part because we all do various things in our jobs. Like me, I'm an academic. I'm around cognitive sort of tasks all the time, compared to someone else who may do manual labor or doing something else, but they're not doing cognitive tasks as I do. But we're both functioning in the same range, in the same normal range. So more has been made out of this study that needed to be made of it. And many of the people who talk about the study don't know what they're talking about. Even the researchers didn't make the claims that many people make about this study. So it's important for you all to know that the cognitive performance of these individuals remained in the normal range. And here are some of the most pernicious sort of things that are being said about marijuana now. I mean, actually, these things actually surprise me. This is a study in which this is a brain imaging study, an MRI study. MRI basically measures the size of various brain structures, and they compare various groups. In this case, they compared marijuana smokers to non-smokers. These were 21-year-olds and 20 in each group. Low number, but they compared 20 people in each group, and they found a difference between the groups in this area called the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala. And here's what they concluded. By the way, it's a picture of the brain at one moment at time. Only at this moment at time, we took this picture. We don't know what was there before, and we don't know after. We just took it at this point. So that's how it works. And this is what they concluded. They concluded that the results of this study indicate that in young recreational marijuana users, structural abnormalities in the nucleus accumbens and amygdala can be observed. Structural abnormalities. So this is an interesting thing. When we see these kind of terms like abnormality, implies that you know what the normal structure should look like, right? When you look at this paper, it's not structural abnormality. These people, these kids, and these young people who they tested were all functioning well. They were all working and doing what they needed to do. And so I don't understand where the term structural abnormality came from. Size difference, there was some size difference, but there are size differences between many of us in this room. But no one would be saying that I'm abnormal, or well, maybe some people would say I am abnormal, but they may not say that you are abnormal. But the important point here is that whenever you do these brain imaging studies, you have to have a behavioral endpoint. You have to measure cognition or some other behavioral endpoint in order to make any conclusions about what that means. But they didn't do that. Now it's okay to do this sort of study 20 years ago. That would be okay because it would be new. But this study came out about 3 months ago. That is just inappropriate. That is less than rigorous science. And then, I guess one of the most sort of pernicious things about it is that any difference was interpreted as some clinically significant abnormality. So it would be like taking a side. Here's an analogy. Let me give you an analogy. On your left, you have Nate Robinson. I'm a big basketball fan. Nate Robinson won the NBA slam dunk contest 3 times. He's the only man that ever has done that. And Brad Garrett is the guy who played Raymond's brother on Everyone Loves Raymond. He was Robert. Brad Garrett is 6'9", Nate Robinson is 5'9". So when we look at structure, that is the length of their height, that's the structure, we would predict, based on the logic of those researchers, we would predict that Brad Garrett would outjump Nate Robinson. That's inappropriate. Of course, that's not true, but that's what is happening in some of these sort of scientific papers. It's an inappropriate sort of conclusion that one draws without actually measuring jumping, without measuring cognitive performance, without measuring some sort of behavior. And so as you think about reading the literature and going through the literature is replete with these sort of inappropriate statements based on this type of stuff. It's just inappropriate. So when I think about the whole cognitive and brain effects, it seems to me, I thought this era was over, but to me it seems like what we're in, our era now, is a more sophisticated sort of version of reefer madness. Please, as you look at this sort of evidence or the data or these studies, please look at it critically, because oftentimes people are trying to pull a wool over your eyes because they simply don't have the evidence to support many of the claims that they're making. Another sort of misapprehension deals with this issue, this question that we like to ask: what about the children? This is another sort of, in my view, it becomes a distraction, this particular question. I mean, on the one hand, we all know that when we think about changing the way marijuana is regulated, we're talking about adults. We know that, but the issue becomes focused on the children. And in part because it's one of these things that who wants to say, we don't care about children. Nobody would say that, right? And so that's why that's why the issue is raised. But so you have to take it seriously, and you take it seriously by, again, walking through what are the logical claims, what are the claims that are being made. So you say children, when we think about children, the earlier you start smoking marijuana, for example, the more problems that you will have, the more difficult it would become, and that sort of thing. And so there are correlational studies that show that people who start smoking marijuana earlier will have problems, later problems in life. But again, when you think about this logically, those children who started smoking marijuana at 13, at 14, earlier, there are larger problems than marijuana. There are some real parental supervision problems that are going on. And so there will be problems whether you have marijuana there or not. But marijuana becomes the thing that we blame. And so what you have to do is make sure you tease apart the variables in order to tear apart those kind of simple arguments. But that's where these arguments really are, and those are the crux of the arguments. Another argument is that this issue of gateway drug, because young people, we worry about them going on to harder drugs when they smoke marijuana. That's another one. So it's absolutely true that most people who use heroin and cocaine use marijuana first. That's absolutely true. But we also know that this is also true, that most marijuana smokers don't go on to use any of those drugs. So as we think about this sort of gateway theory and the gateway notion, it's just illogical. But again, many of these arguments are illogical, but it's incumbent upon us to walk through the arguments and then pick them apart slowly. When you do that, you can see that these arguments have no real foundations in evidence. So when we think about, well, why are people so invested in misleading the public about marijuana, and why are they so resistant to having change when it comes to regulating marijuana, particularly when we think about some of the problems that we have all described about marijuana? So why is the public, first of all, constantly being misled? People are constantly being misled about this because of the special interest group. Believe you me, whenever there is such intensity on an issue, somebody is getting paid. And that's why the public is constantly being misled about marijuana. That's the bottom line. People are getting paid. And you say, well, who's getting paid? There are a number of organizations and there are a number of people being paid. You all know well law enforcement sort of interests. Marijuana arrests around the country, in a country in general, half of the arrests for all drugs are for marijuana. And if you decrease marijuana arrests, then they lose some budget funding. Prison industry loses money. A number of people lose money. And then, if they're not going to jail, they're going to treatment. So treatment providers are getting paid. They're invested in this sort of the way we regulate marijuana. By the way, you all should know this. We all know that the vast majority, 90%, above 90% of marijuana smokers don't have a problem where they need treatment, and they certainly don't need prison. So if you got 91% of a population not needing treatment or prison, but that's where most of them are going, these folks stand to lose a lot of money. And politicians also benefit because what they do, they pretend to deal with issues by going after drugs. And going after marijuana is also an easy one to go after, because if I go after marijuana or some other drug, then I don't have to deal with poverty. I don't have to deal with unemployment. I don't have to deal with those real problems. I can just say the real problem is their drug use. And so a number of people are deeply invested in keeping marijuana's legal status where it's at. Now, I didn't mention me, but I have to talk about me too. My profession is deeply invested in keeping marijuana status where it's at. Although nobody will admit this, of course, but I will let you be the judge. Let me just give you an example of how it works. How it works is that the studies that I do and other people who study drugs like marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, all of us who study these drugs get our funding from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse. They fund 90% of the world's research in this area. 90% of the world's research, not U.S., the world's research. So the study from New Zealand, funded by the United States National Institute on Drug Abuse, and their mission, the National Institute on Drug Abuse's mission, is to focus on pathology, the bad things that happens after drug use. Now, the overwhelming majority of people who use drugs, including cocaine, including heroin, the overwhelming majority of those folks use these drugs without a problem. They don't have a problem. So why is it all of our efforts are focused on the problems? What does that mean? That means what gets published is primarily focused on the negative things. Now, this coupled with the fact that scientists in general tend to err on the side of caution. And when I say caution, I mean bad effects. That's what caution means to scientists. We focus on this sort of caution side as if it's without consequences, when in reality, there are huge consequences. When scientists are disproportionately publishing negative things about drugs, it helps to create this environment where certain drugs are deemed evil, and any use of those types of drugs is considered pathological. And this helps to create this environment where we have to try to eliminate the drugs from our society. Some of you all might recall the era of a drug-free world or drug-free United States or a drug-free workplace. Some of you all may have these silly things called the drug-free workplace, right? You all have that, right? It's ridiculous, but in the United States, we actually had this as policy. I think we still have it as policy. There has never been a drug-free world, a drug-free society. There never has been. There never will be. But we accepted this kind of thing like blind sheep. So how it works in science, it's like the person who loses their car keys at night. They lose their car keys at night, and there's a light on. And you're more likely to search under the light for your car keys because that light is shining there. Doesn't mean that your car keys are there, but the light is on. So it's like Upton Sinclair said when he said that it's difficult to get a man, and in this case, in the National Institute on Drug Abuse, a woman, it's difficult to get a man or a woman to understand something when his or her salary depends upon his or her not understanding. That's where we're at when we think about science, much of the science around these drugs. This is where we're starting at. And if you're not questioning from this perspective, you've already lost the game. So this is where we're starting. Now, this concerned me as a scientist, and this is in part why I wrote High Price. But another reason I wrote High Price was I was concerned about racial discrimination. Some of you all, as it relates to our focus on drugs and eliminating drugs from our society. And some of you all are aware of the ACLU's report, The War on Marijuana in Black and White. You all are aware that in the United States, black people, for example, are about almost 4 times more likely than white folks to be arrested for marijuana possession, even though they use the drug at about the same rates. Of course, in Minnesota, you guys do it better than anywhere else except Iowa. I think black people are about 8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana in this state. And then I understand when you look at Minneapolis and St. Paul, that number goes up to as high as 9 times more likely to be arrested. And so these are very real numbers, you know. And so as we as a group think about this, we have to think about some very fundamental things. Even the ACLU report, for example, this says national racial disparity in arrest rates for marijuana possession. Racial disparity? Disparity just simply means difference. This is racial discrimination. And we can't even say it in a report that I like. Our president can't even say it. And he's black. So, so as long as we are like being dishonest like this, there is no hope. So I wrote my piece in The Nation, like I said, about a year ago, to kind of get at these issues and to show my dissatisfaction with not only the marijuana reform movement, but with science as well. And I kind of tried to call people out on this whole issue. And it's because I was concerned that there was nothing in the scientific literature talking about the racial discrimination in arrests for drugs, particularly marijuana. And so I had to ask the question, like, why is this going, why is it, so I'm struggling, like, why is this the case? Well, then I look around the lab and I look around scientific conferences, and then I'm the only brother. Be like, oh, all right. We are racially segregated in our workplace such that it's not a priority. And so these racially segregated workplaces, they breed this type of apathy and willful ignorance, and that's what was happening. And so that's one of the things in my field. And another thing I was thinking about is, like, as I thought about the ACLU report, they used disparity. Why not racial discrimination? I went to the dictionary, and then to figure it out, try to figure these things out. And then I looked at Webster's definition of racial discrimination. And the definition of racial discrimination is unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people on the grounds of race. It has to be willful and deliberate, or discriminatory or abuse behavior towards members of another group. It has to be intergroup. It can't be intragroup. So as I think about this definition, it requires, well, as I think about this definition, the only people who meet the criteria for this definition are these guys, the Ku Klux Klan. They're the only people that meet the definition for racial discrimination. And what that tells, they're the only people that meet the definition, but the impact of these sort of results is no less real, regardless of intent, or regardless if there was a black person who was doing the arresting. It's still real, right? And so what it tells me is that our definition of racial discrimination is so outdated, and it is preventing us from having honest conversations in this country. This definition has got to go. So when people start talking about what can we do, you can start talking about this. For one, it's like this definition is inappropriate. Let's lobby to get this changed to something that's more appropriate. And this is what I think is more appropriate. An action that results in unjust or unfair treatment of persons from a specific racial group. Intent is no longer necessary. And the discriminatory behavior can be perpetuated by members of the same group. So then we can really start getting into, it's like, we can now talk about who's a racist and what's a racist. So we think about these policies, these drug policies. Many of the lawmakers who passed these policies did not intend for these policies to have racial discriminatory effects. I assure you, because many of them who were part of this were even black or members of minority groups. So they didn't intend for this to happen. So when we think about them being racist, they probably were not racist. People were probably not racist if they unwillingly participated in racial discrimination and changed their behavior once they were made aware of this deleterious and negative impact. But those people who do not change their behavior when they are made aware of this, like we had a mayor in New York City, Mayor Bloomberg, when he was made aware of the racial discrimination in stop and frisk and the marijuana arrest, rather than trying to change the policy, trying to make sure we correct this, he provided statements to try to support what was going on. And he resisted changing that. So Mayor Bloomberg, we call him a racist. And we're waiting to see whether or not Mayor de Blasio is a racist. But this is what you all have to do. You have to call people out. And it doesn't mean that they are necessarily bad people all the way around, but we got to call a spade a spade. If we don't do that, we can't be uncomfortable about this. This is all of our country, and we're all in this together. Because as long as we have these sorts of racial discriminations going, this type of racial discrimination going on, we're all going to be uncomfortable. And I don't like to be uncomfortable. So call people out. Like you all have this thing going on in Minnesota where you have like black people are 8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. Some racial discrimination is going on, and there are some racists who are supporting these policies. Call them out. I mean, when we look at our prisons and all of these sorts of things, this disproportionate number of black men, we should make everybody feel uncomfortable about this. So when we think about other things that we can do, and I think about NOMA as an organization, one of the things that you guys are starting to do anyway, you can fund your own science and educate appropriately. You know, you can write critical reviews when you look at marijuana's effects on the brain and cognition. Write critical reviews for the scientific literature and point out all of the fallacies in these articles that are being published. That it's such easy work. It really is. Because people in the substance abuse field haven't even had to think about it because nobody challenged them. But the world is no longer flat. So, I mean, I think about, here's an example. I published a critical review for methamphetamine because I got really annoyed about what people were saying about methamphetamine effects on cognition and the brain. I published a critical review about a year and a half ago or so, and where I looked at all of the literature on the brain imaging stuff with methamphetamine and cognition. And I concluded that methamphetamine users' cognitive performance was normal, and that any brain differences was within the normal range. But yet, researchers interpreted any differences as being pathological. And I've called people out. And this was funded by Open Society Foundation, and I wrote a report, but then I published something in the scientific literature. It's an excellent model. Well, it's time right now, actually, as I think about it, as I'm talking right now. We have to do the same thing with marijuana one now. It's time for that. All right, who's going to fund it? Let's do it. We have to do that. Y'all not feeling it like me? We have to write a critical review for marijuana and look at the brain imaging and cognition and point out where the researchers were less than careful because it's time. Yeah. And another thing we can do, we have to work to change the legal status of marijuana as well as other drugs. Please don't have a blind spot for cocaine or heroin, because I assure you, marijuana in some cases can be as dangerous or more dangerous than heroin in some cases. If you know anything about pharmacology, you'll know that drugs are drugs. And so please don't be elitist and forget about those other drugs. So we have to work to change the legal status of all of these drugs. And so when we think about changing the legal status of these drugs, the question becomes now, I even hear the people who were pro-prohibition talking about, well, I'm with decriminalization. I can do decriminalization, but I can't do legalization. So the dial has changed. It has moved. And so the question becomes decriminalization or legalization. This is a complicated one for me because in High Price, I argue for decriminalizing all drugs. But over the past year and a half or so, I've learned so much. I have learned a lot listening to people. I've learned a lot from people criticizing me. This has been great, actually. And so now I know that decriminalization can be used in the same way prohibition has been used. Because in New York, for example, we have decriminalized marijuana since 1977 or 75. Since the 70s, we've decriminalized marijuana. But we arrest about 50,000 people a year or so, or something like that. We arrest a large number of marijuana, folks for marijuana, mainly black and brown people, under decriminalization. And so given this sort of thing, and I know it happens around the country, and given this sort of thing, the goal may very well be drug legalization. But I have to tell you, we have to make sure that we educate people about the effects of drugs and all that we know, so we can prevent articles like Maureen Dowd's getting any sort of real attention. Because if you don't prevent those kind of articles getting tractions, the hysteria perpetuated in those arguments are worse than the drug effects themselves. And they are the things that lead to bad policy. And so that's my major concern now with Washington and Colorado, these stories that people are saying about these drugs. And so we have to do our part in educating folks about drugs. And we have to call out racial discrimination where we see it. In arrests, in prisons, in segregated workplaces, in organizations. You know, there was a time when Malcolm X said that, Malcolm X once said that the most segregated hour in the United States is high noon on Sunday when we all go to church. I think today the most segregated hours is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We might be working for a same company, but we are not in similar roles. We have management and we have service workers. We really have to work on racial segregation in the workplace. If we work on racial segregation in the workplace, many of these issues go away. And I think that the marijuana reform movement can play a major leader in this respect as things are changing in Colorado and Washington, that people are creating businesses and we have these marijuana shops and so forth. Make sure those things are racially integrated. Make sure that we are leaders and we can actually embarrass our federal government, because when we think about what they look like, they certainly are not racially integrated in places where they should be. We can call other people out, but we have to be a leader, and this is certainly one of the places we can be a leader. But we have to be committed, because if you're not committed, it's not going to happen. Thank you.